Hi, this is Mrs. Solomon, and we are moving along in the primeval history. Today we are going to discuss Genesis chapter 6 through 9, which covers the narrative of Noah and the flood. So please make sure that you have read Genesis chapters 6 through 9. It's very important that you have read them, as opposed to just listening to me talk and thinking that you're going to get it all, because it'll help to give you a basis upon which to understand what I'm talking about here. So let's get started. Chapter 6, the narrative starts out by saying, when people began to multiply on the face of the ground and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all that they chose. And it seems like things are going along well. It doesn't seem like inherently there's anything wrong with that. But if you have your HarperCollins Study Bible, which you should, you need to take a notice of the HarperCollins Study Bible notes for chapter 6, 1 through 4. That is an excellent explanation of who these sons of God are. Now, as I have said here, that the sons of God are part of the divine council possibly, but I really need you to read that entire note. So make sure that you have done that. But essentially what you have going on here is that the sons of God, by taking wives for themselves, the sons of God are part of the divine council. They are part of the divine. They are taking wives from humanity. By them coming together, what you have here is a breach of the boundary that God has set between the divine and the human. So that has been broken. Notice that it was initiated by the divine beings. It was initiated by the sons of God. However, God is not pleased. He says in verse 3, "My spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh. Their days shall be 120 years. So now human lifespan is limited. And if you read any of the genealogies prior to this, it appears that people lived for a very long time, or at least that's what the genealogies sort of imply. We'll talk about that in class. But God is not pleased, and he says, okay, I'm going to make it so that human life, people can only live a certain number of years. And in fact, Moses does live 120 years. So it continues on to say that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. The Nephilim are the offspring or the children of the sons of God and the daughters of human. So they are on the earth right now. Once again, though, God is not pleased, because with that act and with human procreating with the divine, he says, the Lord saw the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. So it implies here very strongly that humans are perpetually and permanently evil. So the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on the earth. Notice the anthropomorphic language. God is having emotion here, and it grieved him to his heart. So God decides to end life by a flood. And remember how creation began. Creation began with water. So what God is going to do is he's going to flood the earth with water again, essentially bringing back that primordial state. So he says, I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created, people together with animals and creeping things and birds of the air. He is sorry that he made them, but there is one person who finds favor in the sight of the Lord. And in contrast with the rest of humanity, Noah is deemed righteous. Now there's a little bit of a break in the story with the introduction of the Toldo, where it says these are the descendants of Noah. So you can expect that there's going to be a story about Noah now that continues from here on out through the rest of this part of the narrative. And it describes who Noah is, a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Blameless in his generation when the rest of his generation was considered to be wicked, because he walked with God. He had a relationship with God. And of course you can see here that he has 3 sons. But the narrator goes on to say, or the writer goes on to say, that the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And so he says in verse 13, his decision is that he has determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of flesh. So he's going to destroy all of them along with the earth. So he tells Noah to make an ark. And so Noah does that. In verse 22, it says, Noah did this. He did all that God commanded. And because he's righteous, he's perceived to be obedient. But he says in verse 18, I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark. And so he bring your family, and then you're going to bring some animals as well. So you're going to bring two of every kind into the ark, two of everything, it says. And so he does all of this. This is the first covenant contained within the Hebrew Bible. It's referred to as either the Noahide covenant or the Noachian covenant after Noah. And we'll talk about what covenant means in a little bit. So in chapters 7 and 8, you get the big flood. Okay? And I'm not going to go over the exact details of this flood account. What you do need to know, though, is as you read through it, you'll notice that God initially says bring two of every kind, but then when you read on in chapter 7, he says bring 7 pairs of animals. And so what it appears to be here, because of that difference, also because of the names of God that are used from one portion of the narrative to the next, you can assume, just like we have 2 creation accounts, we have 2 flood accounts here that have been merged together. But in any event, you get the waters of chaos once again. God wipes out everything by the flood. Everything is gone except for Noah and all that he has brought into the ark. So what is essentially happening here is a cleansing. It's a cleansing. The waters of chaos wiped out all that was destructive, all that was sinful, and the waters cleansed it all. And so that's what you sort of have described here. A recreation. A recreation in chapters 7 and 8. Necessarily, the floods subside, just like God divided the waters with the dome in chapter 1 of Genesis. And after the flood subsides, we enter into chapter 9. And it starts out by saying, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So you get the same blessing that we see in chapter 1 repeated here in chapter 9. That makes sense if you look at this narrative as a recreation. Everything is cleansed. Now God can repeat the blessing once again. Now, we didn't talk about this in Genesis chapter 1, but when God created humanity, the only thing that they ate was stuff that was related to vegetables. They were vegetarians. God did not give instruction that they could eat meat. Here he says in verse 3, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And just as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. So now they can begin to eat meat. The only caveat is this: you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. You have to make sure everything is fully cooked, because blood represents life. And if you read down further, he says, for your own lifeblood, I will surely require a reckoning. From every animal I will require it, and from human beings, each one for the blood of another, I will require a reckoning for human life. Whoever sheds the blood of a human, by a human shall that person's blood shall be shed. For in his own image God made humankind. So blood represents life, and human life is sacred because humans were created in God's image. So yes, they can eat meat, but it's got to be fully cooked because life, the blood represents life, and life is sacred. So here are the details of this covenant. He says in verse 9, as for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, but not only with the humans, he says with every living creature. And this covenant, he says, I establish it that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. Well, let's talk about what a covenant is real briefly, because we're going to see 4 of them, or 5, in the Hebrew Bible. This is the first. A covenant is an agreement that brings about a relationship of commitment between God and his people. So it's an agreement between the two. And in this one, God has initiated this covenant. What is the agreement? The agreement is the promise that God won't destroy the earth nor humans on the earth. Now it says here by flood, but don't start getting nitpicky and say, oh, well, he can destroy it by a fire or he can destroy it by earthquake. No, that's what they knew at that time. That is the destructive force that was most familiar to them, those that were writing this. And so essentially what he's saying is that with nothing else shall he destroy humanity or the earth. He won't destroy them at all, whether it's by flood or by any other means. So how do you know? Because God has given a sign of the covenant. He says, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. With each covenant, with most of the covenants that are presented in the Hebrew Bible, that there is always a sign. This one is a rainbow. I have set my bow in the clouds. But he doesn't refer to it as a rainbow as such. That doesn't mean that that's not what it is. But when he's talking about a bow is a symbol of war, like a bow and arrow. So what he has done, he's set aside this weapon of war. He set aside this weapon that is destructive. That's what the flood was designed to do, was to destroy everything and to start all over. So he says, I'm going to set aside this bow. I'm going to place it in the clouds. And whenever that bow is in the clouds, he says in verse 15, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. So that's essentially the covenant that God has made between Noah and all of creation. Started out with the wickedness of humankind, remember. And so what I'd like for you to answer are two questions. What does this narrative tell us about the human condition? And what does this narrative tell us about the nature of God? So be prepared to answer those questions. Come to class with any questions that you have, and we'll go through that narrative. Okay? Thanks so much, and I'll see you in class.